Alors, bienvenue ce soir. Vous savez, on fait un café scientifique, donc par définition, moi je n'aime pas des cafés scientifiques où il y a 100 personnes, 200 personnes. Là, on est une vingtaine. Je crois que ça peut être très agréable dans la mesure où vous voulez participer. Alors, il y aura un micro là qui est derrière, vous vous levez, vous vous présentez et vous posez votre question. How many of you think that they are bilingual, they understand both French and English? The majority of you? Great, perfect. That's very nice, because our panel is also close to bilingual. So we'll be doing alternating in French and English all the time, moi aussi également. So before we start, I'm going to give you an overview of how we're going to proceed very quickly. So I'm going to be, first of all, talking about the Zika very shortly, and then presenting each of our three guests, because on this wall, you will see appearing another guest, which could not be here today. Alors, cette personne-là va faire ça via Skype. Alors, par Skype, on aura la troisième personne qui va être là en vidéo. Et pendant la période de questions, elle sera là en audio seulement. Alors, ensuite, je vais leur donner 10 minutes maximum chacun. Donc, je vais être le gardien du temps. You'll see after 10 minutes, I count them off. Et après le 10 minutes chacun, donc 30 minutes, on va prendre une pause. On a été très généreux, là. On nous a fait un petit buffet. Alors, si vous voulez d'ailleurs venir parler avec nos distingués invités, n'hésitez pas. Et par la suite, on revient. Et là, on a une période de questions. Alors, moi, j'en aurai, parce que moi, je suis journaliste par définition, donc je pose des questions, c'est ma vie. Mais j'espère que vous aurez des questions. Profitez-en, puisqu'on n'est pas beaucoup, il n'y aura pas de longue ligne. Soyez actifs. Je crois que c'est un sujet qui mérite d'être débattu. Alors, je crois que je ne me suis même pas présenté. Mon nom est Michel Rochon. Je suis journaliste scientifique et médical à Radio-Canada. Je travaille pour l'émission Découverte et j'ai également une chronique médicale au téléjournal qui s'appelle « À votre santé » avec Céline Galipeau à tous les lundis. Alors, le Zika. Moi, ça fait 33 ans que je fais le métier. J'ai vu beaucoup d'épidémies, de fausses épidémies, de pseudo-épidémies, d'épidémies annoncées qui ne se sont pas avérées. Nous, quand on a vu ça apparaître, nous les journalistes, je vais donner ma perspective et ils auront leur perspective en santé publique et en recherche. On est toujours très prudent. Ce virus est apparu dans une toute petite forêt en Ouganda en 1947 qui s'appelait la forêt Zika, hein, c'est son nom. Il reste presque plus rien d'ailleurs de cette forêt-là. Et ce n'est pas un virus qui a fait beaucoup de tapage médiatique. Il y a eu de petites épidémies en Asie, en Afrique, dans les Polynésies, mais rien de majeur. Et là, soudainement, arrivent au Brésil ces cas suspects de microcéphalie qui ont soudainement attiré l'attention de l'OMS et tout de suite après, naturellement, les médias, avec finalement, moi, ce que je raconte, what I normally say is that when you have a potential epidemic, you have three things. You have, it's a triangle. It's a very easy triangle. You've got the powers that be, the governments, the World Health Organization. You have the scientists with the scientific knowledge, and you have public opinion. It's a triangle. That's the way it works. In the middle of the triangle, there's the media. We focused our beam on the three sides of this triangle, and we push around the ideas. And ce qui est difficile avec le Zika, c'est que l'OMS n'a pas attendu le savoir scientifique pour prendre la décision politique de dire on a possiblement là quelque chose de planétaire, quelque chose de potentiellement dangereux, mais on n'a pas de statistiques, on n'a pas étudié le phénomène vraiment. Alors, on se trouve avec une science à la remorque qui nous amène toutes sortes d'études au compte-gouttes avec des petites cohortes ou des cas isolés, individuels. Et là, bon, il y a quelques jours, je ne sais pas si vous êtes au courant, there's this study from Polynesia saying that maybe 1% of infected women might bear a microcephalic child. So these statistics have to be taken very prudently by the governments, by the media, by the people. That's why we're having this cafe today, in order to discuss of all these things, what to do about it, preparedness, what can science do? Can science really find a vaccine? Can science really prevent us from having all these, unfortunately, bad situations for children, and also this being a neurological virus, possible impacts for adults also. So, without further ado, let's present these people here in front of me. Voila. I'm going to put my glasses since I'm so young. We have Dr. Howard New right here. He's Associate Deputy Chief Public Health Officer at the Public Health Agency of Canada. Donc, il est le sous-administrateur en chef adjoint de la santé publique pour le pays à l'Agence de la santé publique du Canada. Il est médecin, il est gradué de l'Université de Toronto, spécialiste en épidémiologie et en santé communautaire. Vous avez été le directeur général du Centre de lutte contre les maladies transmissibles et les infections et le Centre de mesures et d'intervention d'urgence de l'Agence. C'est bien ça? Oui, il y a quand même eu des postes importants. Je crois que j'ai lu sur votre biographie un peu le tremblement de terre en Haïti en janvier 2010. Ça a été important dans votre carrière aussi, je crois. Ça a été, ce sont des moments difficiles quand on gère des catastrophes humaines. Alors, on va revenir 2 minutes. Je vais commencer par aussi présenter le Dr. Brian Ward. Bienvenue parmi nous. Il va nous parler en français puisqu'il est né à Granby. Voilà. Fantastique. Il est professeur agrégé du Centre de recherche sur les interactions hôtes-parasites à l'Université McGill. Donc, c'est un spécialiste de vaccins, donc c'est intéressant pour nous. Il s'intéresse à ces choses-là depuis longtemps. Pendant près de 20 ans, il a travaillé sur un modèle, celui de la rougeole et du VIH en Afrique. Il ne le fait plus. Et son laboratoire inclut également le Centre national de parasitologie, Vous avez publié sur une autre pandémie, H1N1, je crois. Alors donc, vous êtes habitué à ce genre d'événement global qui fait peur. Alors, on va voir ce soir si on est devant ça. Et j'ai sur cet écran, mais on ne le verra pas tout de suite, mais tantôt, le Dr. Tom Hobman, qui est en Alberta actuellement. Donc, il est professeur au département de biologie cellulaire. C'est un spécialiste, entre autres, de certains virus ARN, parce que I didn't tell you it's an RNA virus. We'll probably get into more details about that. The West Nile virus is also an RNA virus, and the dengue virus. It's all a family of these type of viruses, so he's a specialist in that. And he will talk about working on diagnostic tools and screening for drugs. Since we have 3 specialists, we divide our talk into 3 different aspects. We're going to talk about public health, more on the clinical aspect with you, and the fundamental research with Mr. Hobman. So without further ado, you have 10 minutes. You can take 5 if you want.
Maybe more. We'll see.
Yeah, it's all yours, doctor.
Okay. Well, merci beaucoup, Michel. C'est vraiment un plaisir pour moi d'être ici ce soir avec vous autres afin de participer à une bonne discussion au sujet du virus Zika. I will give my presentation in English. I think it's probably easier for the flow. Mais je suis prêt après pour répondre aux questions et discuter des 2 langues officielles. So, what I'm going to do, hopefully, is set the table for my 2 distinguished colleagues, Dr. Hobman online and Dr. Ward here, by giving you a general overview from a public health perspective about the Zika virus. And really what I'd like you to do is take away 3 messages, 3 key messages or take home. Number 1, the risk to Canadians from the Zika virus infection living in Canada is very low. Number 2, the evidence for potential harmful health effects linked to the Zika virus infection is continually evolving. And as a result, it's very dynamic and fluid. And public health, in response, is taking what we call a very precautionary approach in developing guidance and updating it as evidence becomes more available to address the risks. And then number 3, take-home point, collaboration, both internationally and across the various sectors, will be critical as we collectively deal and address this emerging public health threat. So let's take each of those points in turn. The first one being that the risk to Canadians in Canada is very low. Why is that? Well, first of all, as Michel mentioned, The virus, we've known about it for quite some time. It was discovered in 1947 in monkeys in the jungle. I think the forest was called Zika forest. That's why it's the Zika virus. And since that time, there have been a number of outbreaks, both in Africa and Asia. And as Michel mentioned, not much was really sort of noticed about it. The illness for most people is quite mild. Only about 20 to 25% of people in general actually do even develop an illness and symptoms. And if they do develop an illness, it's usually self-limiting, usually lasts no more than a week. And symptoms are things like having a headache, fever, conjunctivitis, red eyes, muscle aches and pains, and really there's no real serious risk of complications and hospitalization. So that's it. So really, what's the big deal? Well, first of all, the way it's transmitted primarily is by mosquito bites, but not just any mosquito. There are two specific species, and I hope I pronounce it right for my colleagues, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. Why is that important? Well, those mosquitoes are also responsible for transmitting lots of other diseases such as dengue, and they're found in hot climates, tropical and subtropical. And I think we have lots of things to complain about in Canada, but because of our cooler climates, this is one advantage. These mosquitoes are not established here, and therefore the risk of having transmission by these mosquitoes of the Zika virus in Canada is essentially non-existent. Okay, so having said that, why the big deal now? Well, as Michel mentioned, for the first time, the Zika virus is now, quote, in our backyard. It's now in the Americas, and it's essentially, I think, started late 2014, reports Easter Island, etc. And then throughout last year and going into this year, there's really been an explosion of cases. I think in at least hundreds of thousands. I think Brazil alone is saying they have maybe over 1 million cases of the Zika infection. But beyond that, what's been fascinating, and I say this from a scientific point of view, is the potential link with the serious health effects, primarily in pregnant women and their babies. During the same time that the Zika virus was circulating through Brazil, the health authorities there also noted quite a remarkable increase in something called microcephaly. I think it was a 20-fold increase in this congenital malformation, which essentially is babies being born with an abnormally small head and sort of an underdeveloped brain. It's quite devastating, as you can imagine, for both the mothers and the entire family. And once that was noted, things just ramped up from there. As Michel mentioned, the World Health Organization, after reviewing the evidence and what was known to date, on February 1st, declared what was happening in the Americas a public health emergency of international concern. So what does that mean? Well, in this context, I think it really mobilized the world to take this seriously, and I think enhance collaboration on a number of fronts in terms of how we should address this. So besides the malformations, more evidence is also coming to light that there's a whole range of neurological consequences for the developing fetus. In addition, there's also been reports of something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. If I were to simplify that, I think I would say that it's a rare condition that can happen, and it's essentially one in which the body's own immune system sort of attacks cells in the nervous systems, and in this case, sometimes leading to situations such as paralysis. So with that, so the mosquitoes which transmit the virus are not established in Canada, so quote, what's the big deal? Well, as Canadians, we all love to travel, especially in the winter, and to go to warmer climates. And so the issue here is that over 3 million Canadians annually travel to places where now in our hemisphere the Zika virus is circulating. To date, and this is the latest information I have, and it's going to change tomorrow, I'm sure, is I think as of the 14th of March, 2 days ago, there are 25 reported cases in Canada. But consistent with what we know, all 25 cases to date have been linked to travel of those individuals in areas where the Zika virus is circulating. And there's been no case of what we call locally transmitted disease or virus infection here in Canada. So that's the good news. So that's point number one. Point number two, what the evidence is showing is quite dynamic and evolving day by day. And the other important aspect is that public health is taking a very precautionary approach. So as I mentioned with the microcephaly, the main mode of transmission is through mosquito bites, but certainly now there's evidence of what we call mother-to-child transmission. A definitive causal link to date has not been fully established, but the evidence is growing stronger day by day. The other part, which is also interesting, is that there's also several reports in the literature of a possible sexual transmission. So these are situations where men have been traveling in these affected areas, have come home, had sexual relations with their partners, and these women who have not traveled to the areas and stayed at home have subsequently become infected. There's also reports that blood products are also potentially another vehicle for transmission. And so you can see as the evidence evolves, how do we deal with this? So I think it's maybe a topic for discussion, as Michelle said, in terms of how governments and public health in general is reacting. But I think right now it's the right approach and it's very precautionary. So taking each of those elements in turn, what we do know is that, unfortunately, at the present time, there is no treatment or vaccine to deal with the Zika virus. So the number one way to prevent infection is still preventing mosquito bites. So just the same advice we would give for people who would travel and want to avoid malaria and other diseases, personal protection is the key. The usual loose clothing, long sleeve shirts, light colored clothing, long pants, shirts tucked into your pants, maybe pants tucked into your socks, use of insect repellents, also making sure that hopefully whatever habitation or whatever dwelling you're in is secure from mosquitoes coming in. If that can't be done through, let's say, window screens, etc., then using personal bed netting and so on is also very important. So those are things that are important to do, regardless of Zika virus, because as we all know, there's lots of other diseases circulating. Now, because of the potential for adverse health effects for the fetus, the evidence has evolved. So at the beginning, our agency included, the advice was something along the lines of pregnant women or women who may plan to become pregnant should have a discussion with their healthcare provider and may consider postponing their travel. Since the WHO also looked at the more recent evidence, the direction, I think, has become much stronger. And now essentially what we are saying is that women who are pregnant who plan to become pregnant should avoid travel to areas where the Zika virus is circulating. So that's much stronger. Now, how about the men? Well, men still travel, and they're going to hopefully take personal protective measures. But because of the evidence to date that it can also persist, for example, in the sperm for quite some time after leaving the country, the current advice, which I'm sure may be updated depending on new evidence, is that men should use a condom with all sexual partners for 2 months after the return from an area where Zika virus is circulating, with any sexual partner who may become pregnant. And if their sexual partner is someone who is already pregnant, then they should be using the condoms for the duration of the pregnancy. Lots of interesting stuff there. With respect to the blood donations and other products which may be contaminated, evidence is also evolving, but at the present time, it's 21-day deferral for people coming back in terms of giving blood donation. Because sperm, it may persist longer, and also because of the potentially devastating consequences, the deferral is even longer, up to 6 months. I think that's the latest that certainly the CDC and others, including ourselves, have put forward. So that's the kind of guidance that's being put out there in a very, I say, a precautionary approach, we call abundance of caution. But I think the best thing that all of you could or should be doing is keep yourself as well informed as possible. So there's lots of, I would say, websites. Everyone uses the internet and Google and so on. Go to trusted sites. Go to the WHO. Go to CDC. Go to our website in the Government of Canada. I think it's easy. In English, it's healthycanadians.gc.ca. And there's also travel health notices on travel.gc.ca. Because at the present time, it essentially in our hemisphere, I think over 30 countries are affected. WHO says at least since 2007, 50 countries have reported cases of Zika. And so I think we just need to sort of keep on top of the information evidence as it moves along. So I think that's all I'll say in terms of the evidence and the approach we're taking. And I'm getting short of time here, so I'll move it along.
You're perfect, Dr. New. 10 minutes flat. Thank you very much.
No, one more. Third point.
Third point. Okay.
Collaboration is key.
Yes,
Another 2-3 minutes.
Yes.
Collaboration is key because no one sector can do it alone. So I'm just going to talk about the various levels of collaboration. Internationally, our agency, the federal government, is working very closely with our counterparts, the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, the CDC, to exchange information, what scientific evidence we know of, so that we can plan accordingly in terms of our response. So that's at the international level. Within Canada, we communicate closely with what we call the Chief Medical Officers of Health, which are the lead public health authorities in each of the provinces and territories, to make sure that we're all sort of doing the same thing in the same way for all Canadians. As well, our National Microbiology Laboratory is also prepared to test any sample from across the country, but they're also working with their provincial and territorial colleagues to ensure that there's also what we call PT capacity in terms of laboratory analysis. We're also working with experts across the country to provide guidance. For example, expert committees that we refer to. One is called CATMAT, the acronym, standing for the Committee to Advise on Tropical Medicine and Travel. And the guidance is also available for healthcare providers and people who would like to test their patients. And then, obviously, the research agenda, I'll leave it to my colleagues, but in the area of diagnostics, vaccine research, lots of things that there still need to be done, and I think collaboration is the key. Academics, governments, the private sector, everyone has a role to play. And finally, in closing, I'd leave one more point. We're talking about a lot of the scientific biomedical aspects, but what's interesting to me as we move along is that this issue has also raised a number of what I would call social, cultural, and political issues as they pertain to I would say, the broad area of women's reproductive health. And as we move forward, I think those aspects and issues need to be taken into account as well, so that we move forward really in terms of the best public health for all. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and look forward to the discussion. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. New. Thank you. Appreciate that. Now, Dr. Ward, 10 minutes also. Now you're going to, I think, be talking more about the clinical aspects of it all. This is not the first virus that can cause damage to newborns in the womb. Other viruses also can cause microcephaly. Can you give us an overview and then tell us what can we do on a clinical level for that type of virus?
Merci pour cette belle surprise. La première chose que j'aimerais dire, c'est merci d'avoir venu. Et l'histoire que Howard vient de nous raconter, ça présente une belle image des Québécois et Québécoises sur les plages de Cuba, qui vient de rapporter un premier cas, tout enrobé avec leurs vêtements bien rangés, pas de bikini, mais tout couvert de anti-moustiques. C'est vraiment une belle image. Alors, avec une aide, c'est ça. Alors, la meilleure façon d'éviter le problème, c'est de faire du ski. Malheureusement, il n'y a pas ce n'était pas une grande saison pour le ski ici. Bon, alors la première question de Michel, oui, il y a une longue histoire des microbes qui peuvent causer des problèmes pour les grossesses. Non seulement pour le fœtus, mais aussi pour la femme. Mais il y en a plusieurs, toxoplasmose, une parasite, un virus rougeole et des virus herpès peuvent faire des problèmes aussi. Et maintenant, on se trouve avec une autre. Et je ne prendrai pas une pleine 10 minutes parce qu'il n'y a pas grand-chose à dire, parce que nous sommes en plein milieu de découvrir qu'est-ce qui se passe avec ce virus, où nous avons certaines données, mais j'aimerais bien vous présenter 2 cas, et ce sont des cas de notre clinique. Je travaille dans la clinique santé voyage, à l'hôpital, le nouveau hôpital Glen, le plus petit super hospital du monde. Mais nous avons une clinique santé voyage très, très active à cause de nos hivers, pour la plupart. Il y a des gens qui veulent voyager à cause de notre population d'immigrants qui viennent des pays très intéressants, de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, le bassin de Caraïbes et l'Amérique du Sud, centrale. Alors, il y a des gens qui voyagent beaucoup et ils voyagent dans les pays où maintenant on a une éclosion énorme. Alors, un grand pourcentage des moustiques qui se trouvent dans ces régions sont infectés. Alors, la probabilité d'être infecté à ce moment pour les voyageurs, c'est assez large. C'est rare dans une situation endémique d'avoir des voyageurs qui attrapent une maladie comme ça. Mais dans une situation épidémique, quand une grande proportion de la population locale est infectée, que les moustiques sont infectés, c'est à ce moment qu'on voit les cas chez les voyageurs. Alors, un premier cas, c'était une madame qui est retournée d'un voyage touristique d'une semaine en République dominicaine et elle a été vue dans notre clinique. Elle était complètement asymptomatique. Et nous avons fait les tests nécessaires pour la dengue, pour chikungunya, parce qu'elle avait les douleurs un peu. Elle n'avait pas un syndrome viral, mais elle avait les douleurs des articulations. Alors, nous avons envoyé les tests mi-décembre. Nous avons reçu les résultats fin janvier. Et c'est un des points les plus importants pour les diagnostics. Un diagnostic qui revienne 6 semaines plus tard, c'est pas vraiment rentable pour la clinique. Alors, probablement, nos collègues en Alberta vont en parler plus. Mais ça, c'est un premier point. On a besoin des tests beaucoup plus rapides, beaucoup plus fiables, parce que le test ELISA, le test initial, donne les faux positifs. Et qu'est-ce que c'est le pire? C'est de donner une centaine de madames enceintes l'information qui sont positives quand c'est un faux positif, ou de ne pas donner l'information pour une seule madame qui est enceinte et qui a vraiment la maladie. Alors, à ce moment, on n'a pas grand choix. Il y a les gens qui travaillent très fort pour implanter ces tests d'une façon plus locale, mais on en a besoin des meilleurs tests. C'est le premier point. Deuxième point, c'est une madame qui, maintenant, elle est canadienne, ils vivent dans l'Amérique centrale. Elle est professeure canadienne, mais elle travaille en Amérique centrale. Et elle a découvert qu'elle est enceinte 5 semaines. Et elle m'a appelé il y a 2 semaines en me demandant qu'est-ce que je dois faire. Parce que ma vie est ici, mon épouse est ici, nos enfants sont ici. Qu'est-ce que je dois faire? Parce que je ne veux pas être parmi les 1% ou 2%, ou on ne sait pas. Et les médecins, les scientifiques, ils ne sont pas confortables en disant toujours « on ne sait pas ». Et en réalité, j'ai assisté à plusieurs réunions, j'ai donné plusieurs interviews pendant les premières semaines, presque 1 ou 2 par semaine. Et pour chacun des séries de questions, on se trouve avec « je ne sais pas » et « on ne sait pas ». Et ce n'est pas connu. Alors ça, c'est la raison qu'on doit faire la recherche pour aider ces gens, parce que si c'était moi, si c'était ma femme, je dirais « retournez au Canada ». Parce que vous êtes en plein milieu d'une éclosion énorme. Et vous avez une probabilité beaucoup plus large que moi, j'accepterais d'avoir cette maladie, ou que votre épouse peut avoir la maladie et le transmettre à vous par les relations sexuelles. Alors, ça rend les voyages beaucoup plus intéressants, on peut dire. Pour les hommes qui voyagent dans ces régions, on peut le considérer comme une pénalité de voyage. Pas de sexe pour plusieurs mois après le retour. Mais on peut faire les blagues, mais avec chaque blague, il y a des questions très importantes. Et je sais que cette madame, elle a décidé de revenir au Canada pour la durée de la grossesse. Et ça, c'est une décision très, très difficile. Et pour elle, au moins, elle a l'occasion de le faire. Elle a l'option. Et pour les gens qui vivent dans ces pays, ils n'ont pas. Alors, c'est à nous, la communauté des chercheurs du monde, de trouver des bonnes réponses, parce que l'an prochain, j'aimerais bien qu'on ne dise pas « je ne sais pas » ou « on ne sait pas » pour la plupart de ces questions très importantes, non seulement de recherche, mais de clinique. C'est tout.
C'est tout. Merci beaucoup, M. Ward. C'est fort intéressant parce que là, vous avez des cas concrets. Vous avez été chanceux. Déjà, vous avez deux cas dans votre propre clinique du voyage et qui sont des cas qui sont fort intéressants puisqu'ils soulèvent les deux aspects principaux, en fait. La peur qu'ont ces femmes-là qui tombent enceintes et la banalité de comment doit-on voyager, effectivement, complètement habillé sur la plage.
Mais peut-être je dirais une autre chose.
Oui.
Ça aurait été beaucoup plus facile si tout le monde atteint avec ce virus avait des symptômes.
Oui.
Ça rend la situation presque incompréhensible pour les gens de décider quand 80% n'ont rien comme symptômes. Parce que les gens peuvent voyager et ils ne savent pas si son mari est infecté, si elle est infectée. Quoi faire avec ça? C'est une situation presque insupportable pour les femmes qui veulent être enceintes.
C'est un cheval de Troie silencieux.
Oui, c'est ça.
Voilà. Bon, parfait. Merci beaucoup. On va passer au troisième invité. Là, on va se téléporter en Alberta grâce à Skype. Now, they've spoken about things that are very basic. Now you're doing fundamental research. You're a researcher. Tell us if we can get things going. Can we do better diagnostic tools? Can we work on a vaccine? Can we work on drugs? It's all yours. 10 minutes.
Sure. So I'll give a bit of background, and I didn't understand what Brian was saying, unfortunately, so I hope I don't overlap. And a bit of what I had prepared is similar to Howard, but I'll try and differentiate. So for those of you that don't know, so Zika virus is what we call an RNA virus, and it's a relatively small virus. The reason we call it an RNA virus is that its genome is made of RNA or ribonucleic acid as opposed to DNA, which is the genetic material in our cells, of course. So if you compare the size of a Zika virus particle or virion, it's about a third to one half the size of a flu virus particle, and it's slightly larger than a picornavirus, which causes the common cold. So slightly larger than cold virus, but much smaller than flu virus. It encodes about 10 proteins, which are required for replication and assembly of the virus. So as Howard touched on, it's not a new virus. It's certainly new to most of us, just because we haven't heard of it. But it was discovered about 70 years ago in Uganda. And as I said before, I would venture to say that probably most people, except for one or two, had never heard of Zika virus before January 2016. Certainly, when I became aware of it, which was last year, one of my postdoctoral fellows brought it up, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know what it was at the time. But we were working on similar viruses, dengue and West Nile, so it was relatively easy for us to move into this space. So the reason that people don't know much about Zika virus, and I think Howard alluded to this as well, is that it wasn't associated with any serious disease. But of course, this all changed in 2015 when a large increase in microcephaly was detected or reported during the Zika virus outbreak in Brazil. So Zika virus is part of a large family of viruses called flaviviruses. There's many disease-causing viruses in this group, including dengue virus, West Nile virus, yellow fever virus, and these are all mosquito-transmitted viruses. Unfortunately, there's not really much in the way of vaccines or treatments to these viruses. The exception is, well, of course, yellow fever Vaccine's been around for a long time, and recently a dengue virus vaccine has been licensed, but only in a few countries, and it's not what is considered a great vaccine. So Zika virus is most closely related to dengue virus in terms of the viruses we know that cause serious disease. But I looked it up, and the closest virus relative to Zika virus is something called spawned Weni virus, which also causes a fever-like illness, and it's transmitted by mosquitoes in Africa. And again, I'd never heard of this either. So the point being, there's about 70 viruses in this group called flaviviruses, and many of which cause disease in humans. And unfortunately, there's basically no treatments and very few vaccines. One of the other issues, and Brian may have touched on this, is that they do cause similar types of acute diseases, characterized often by fever. And based on these symptoms, it's often impossible to differentiate Zika virus from dengue virus, from chikungunya virus. So one of the issues right now is the lack of cheap and accurate diagnostics. So of course there are PCR or genetic-based diagnostics for Zika virus, but this is not amenable to assaying a lot of clinical samples. So for example, in Brazil, where you have potentially over 1 million cases, PCR is not the way to go. What we need is a more rapid point-of-care diagnostic kit, and this is something we're interested in, as well as many other people. So there's a real race to get these diagnostics put together. There's going to be more than one diagnostic kit, no doubt. So these are well underway. As Howard mentioned, the virus is transmitted mainly by Aedes genus mosquitoes, of which there are many different types of species, but the culprit in the Americas is Aedes aegypti. And correct me if I'm wrong, Howard, but I don't know if it's been shown if the Aedes albopictus actually transmits the virus. I know there's a professor at Brock University that is looking at this, but I don't know if it's been proven yet. I certainly hope it doesn't transmit the virus, because the mosquito is all over the northeast part of the U.S. And even comes into states that border Canada, but we don't know if it transmits the virus.
They're actively looking at that in Brazil. They're trying to see, as well as in Brock, to see if it can be transmitted. But so far,
I don't think it's been proven yet.
It hasn't.
But certainly there are different Aedes species in Africa that can transmit the virus. And we don't know what species of mosquitoes here in North America, other than Aedes aegypti, can transmit. So in addition to mosquitoes being the main mode of transmission, there is evidence for sexual transmission as well. I think there's at least 14 documented cases in the U.S. The virus can also be found in other body fluids, including saliva. And I read one report where actually the virus levels in saliva were even higher than blood. Whether this virus can be transmitted through saliva, we don't know. So I guess one of the most important questions from a basic research perspective, as well as from a clinical perspective, is, why didn't we see association with microcephaly before? Certainly there was purported elevation of Guillain-Barré syndrome during some of the outbreaks in French Polynesia. But the question is, what's happened? Is it just a lack of surveillance, or has there been pathogenic mutations that have occurred when the virus has crossed the Pacific? So this is something we're very interested in as well. And we are quite busy right now constructing what is known as an infectious clone that will allow us to manipulate the virus, make very small changes. So there are two lineages of the virus, called the African lineages and the Asian lineages. And it's the Asian lineages that have given rise to these epidemics. And I think we and others have to take a careful look at the sequence to see what changes have occurred as the virus moved from Africa to Southeast Asia and then across the Pacific to the Americas. And Certainly, with respect to the Asian strains, there haven't been that many changes. So if that's the case, then it should be relatively easy to track pathogenic mutations. Other things of interest are what's the efficiency of in utero infection? So if a mother contracts the virus, presumably during the first trimester, what's the likelihood that she will transmit the virus to the fetus? So the bad news, I guess, is that even though this virus has been around a long, long time, we know very little about it, and this is, I guess, to our peril that we've ignored it because we didn't think it was important. This is the case for many viruses. But I think the good news is that we have a good knowledge base based on what we know about related viruses such as dengue and West Nile and others. And so this serves as a great starting point with which to study Zika virus. So for example, our laboratory, it was relatively easy to apply what we knew to dengue and West Nile to Zika, and things have moved along quite rapidly. And of course, there's other laboratories in the US and Brazil and elsewhere that have done the same thing. So I think we're going to learn an awful lot about this virus very, very quickly. But again, we're starting almost from zero in terms of hardcore scientific knowledge about this virus. So there's lots of exciting things going on right now, and including vaccine development, diagnostics, and some of us are interested in therapeutics as well. So I think it's going to be an exciting time to be working on this pathogen, and we hope that we can do something impactful that will help the public at large. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I didn't want to bore you with any technical details, but I'm certainly happy to answer technical questions or any other scientific questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hobman. I appreciate that very much. Alors, je vais commencer par une question assez générale parce que là, ce qu'on entend, c'est quelque chose de nouveau. Something new arrives. The science isn't there. The science is running behind the announcement that something is happening. And so many questions are unanswered that we're saying to ourselves, is it too late? Will we be really able to do something? Anyone wants to answer that? Nobody wants.
Ça doit commencer par it's never too late.
Is it too late? Or I mean, this virus will follow its natural course. We are 1 billion inhabitants in the Americas. The World Health Organization says that maybe 4 million people will be infected. Leaves a lot that will not be infected. Will we see just a course of a very weak infection across the Americas, or will we see this growing big?
Il n'y avait pas de question qu'on était trop tard pour Ebola. Alors, we have a good example where we were way too late. Je pense que c'est un virus complètement différent, avec une mode de transmission complètement différente, avec une population à risque énorme. Alors, ça n'arrêtera pas sans des interventions. On ne peut pas tuer tous les moustiques de l'Amérique centrale, l'Amérique du Sud et des Caraïbes. Alors, ça va continuer jusqu'au moment qu'on a des interventions appropriées. No, so we're not too late.
OK. Une question canadienne. Vous nous avez dit au tout début que pour l'instant, il n'y avait que des touristes qui reviennent et qui sont porteurs. Notre été va arriver et ça va monter tranquillement vers le nord. Naturellement, nous avons pour l'instant la preuve que l'Aedes aegypti n'est pas au Canada. Mais quelles sont les chances que ce virus-là se trouve une nouvelle niche et saute sur un nouveau moustique? Un moustique de plus en plus nordique, et qu'on se retrouve peut-être avec nos moustiques ici qui pourraient avoir le virus Zika. Est-ce que ça, on a des preuves dans l'histoire biologique que c'est possible? Oui, allez-y donc.
Bon, moi, je ne suis pas un expert, mais peut-être on peut poser la question à Dr. Hobman. Tom, I'm not sure if you got
Are you there?
the question, but it's all about whether there is a risk to Canada in terms of maybe the virus skipping or going into another mosquito vector that is established in Canada as opposed to the current vectors.
I mean, it's possible. I'm not the best person to to ask. I mean, I guess I would refer you to my colleague at Brock University. I mean, it's possible, but I don't know. I mean, if we look at West Nile virus, certainly the number of mosquitoes that can effectively transmit the virus are limited. I mean, it's Culex tarsalis is the primary mosquito. So, you know, it seems that even though these viruses are related to each other, they seem to adapt particularly well to specific mosquito species. So, I mean, let's hope that Zika virus shows the same trend, and that it can't be transmitted by non-Aedes mosquitoes.
But didn't exactly that happen with chikungunya? I mean, chikungunya was primarily Aedes aegypti transmitted, and then it mutated and shifted to be able to. It could always infect albopictus, but it became much more transmissible by the albopictus through mutations. So in recent experience, it's clearly happened.
Yeah, I mean, we're just starting to think about a chikungunya virus project, but again, I'm somewhat ignorant of the mosquito virus relationship. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point you bring up. Is that even though the virus and mosquito can be very well suited to each other in terms of transmission, there's always adaptive mutations that can allow the virus to adapt to another vector.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's talk about diagnostic tools. Now we had a beautiful example with Dr. Ward of having to wait 6 weeks. Remember, if you're expecting your mother to be, and you want to know if you have it, you have to wait 6 weeks. How far are we, and how complicated is it to work out something much more sensitive, cheap, and quick? Anyone?
So one of the things we're working on is a test for NS1. So NS1 is a viral protein made by Zika virus and dengue as well. And the use of NS1 diagnostics, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it has really revolutionized detection of dengue virus, because it's the protein is quite prevalent in the blood at the same time as the fever, and it's abundant. So it's easy to detect, and we're hoping the same thing will work for Zika virus. So we've already purified NS1, and we're just scaling it up and trying to make the necessary antibodies or peptide reagents that can detect NS1 in serum. Now, one of the problems that we're going to face is that there's likely going to be cross-reaction between dengue and Zika virus. That already appears to be the case based on dengue diagnostics. We expect to see the same thing with Zika. That being said, we've also been able to map unique epitopes on Zika virus that are not present on dengue. So we're taking that track as well. So the NS1 test is very useful as a point-of-care diagnostic. The downside of that type of a test is that the NS1 is only present probably as long as the virus is actively replicating. So it's a transient biomarker, and it's only useful for acute infections. After that, one really needs to start looking for antibodies against the virus to determine whether someone's been exposed to it. Anything to add to that, Brian?
No, just to make the distinction that you did make at the end, that the NS1 tests are based on finding the viral protein itself as opposed to the antibody. So it's an antigen detection test as opposed to an antibody detection test. Oh. Most of our viral tests are serologic, where we're just looking for an antibody. And once you have that antibody, it usually takes a couple of weeks to get a detectable response. And then it lasts for many years. The antigen is there for a very short period of time, so it's very useful in that window of period before you make antibodies.
Okay. Is Canada very active and in a good position to be working on these diagnostic tools? Now we've been announcing probably money coming in from les IRSC, but are we in a good position?
I think so. I mean, it's a question of timing, though. There's lots of people interested in. Like I said, we've already purified the NS1 protein. We have also mapped epitopes on the M and E protein, so we're looking at more than just an acute diagnostic as well. So we're looking at diagnostics for antibodies, so as Brian mentioned, the serological tests. So we're interested in this as well. There's lots of other people doing this too. But certainly we're well positioned. Are we going to win the race? I don't know. I've been in discussions with a number of companies that are involved in diagnostics, and what I didn't realize was that there's a whole other field, something called proficiency testing, where there's still a need for reagents for diagnostics by companies that don't make the kit. So companies, for example, will make NS1 that will be used for proficiency testing. They'll make so there's a whole other industry besides the companies that make the diagnostic kits. There's an industry in proficiency testing and providing positive controls for these tests. So there will be a market for these antigens one way or the other, I think.
Because what is very special about this Zika virus is that 4 out of 5 people are without symptoms. Now,
yes, that's the case for many flaviviruses. I mean, dengue is, I don't know what the numbers are, but certainly West Nile, I mean, a lot of people are asymptomatic. And this is, it's a double-edged sword, right? Mm-hmm. Because asymptomatic people can also transmit the virus. So it's, so it's great that you don't necessarily get sick, but the downside is you can probably still transmit the virus.
So in that perspective, is it better to work on a drug or a vaccine? Which will be the most efficient? Will people take the drugs, or should we rather work with a vaccine?
That's a great question. So, I think I can sort of get at it in 2 parts, and I'd be curious to hear from Howard and Brian on their perspective. But certainly a vaccine, would be useful in preventing circulation. There's a number of questions. Would it be contraindicated for pregnant women? What is the therapeutic window for someone who's been exposed to Zika virus? And that would apply to therapeutics as well. So there's, some of the ideas we're interested in are therapeutic monoclonal antibodies that would block mother-to-fetal transmission. But, we don't know the window. Who would take these drugs? Would they be used therapeutically or prophylactically? And that would be the case for antiviral drugs. And then, of course, there's the whole, anti-vaccine landscape, which I'm sure is going to have something to say about this.
In public health in Canada, what would be the perspective? What would we do here?
It might be my own personal perspective, but I think you need to go on the multiple tracks at the same time, because you don't know which one you may have greater sort of advances before the other. The other example I can talk about, in my own experience in terms of other diseases, HIV. Right now we're still looking for a vaccine for HIV, but at the same time, obviously, we didn't just put all our eggs in one basket. Yeah. We're also developing antiretroviral drugs. So I think it's the same for Zika. We need to pursue all avenues.
We've been talking.
Are you Howard? Sorry.
Yes, no, go for it. You, Howard. We were talking during the break about exactly that. So please tell us your own opinion on this.
Moi, je travaille en vaccin. Alors, évidemment, j'ai une certaine biase. Mais en réalité, de convaincre une population de prendre un médicament, quand 80% des gens prendront le médicament pour les raisons altruistiques, les hommes le prendront pour les raisons altruistiques. Moi, je dirais que ce serait impossible de convaincre une population de se traiter d'une telle façon, parce qu'il n'y a aucun médicament qui est sans effet secondaire. Alors, pour moi, la seule approche raisonnable pour l'avenir moyen et long terme, ce sera un vaccin. Et probablement plus d'un vaccin. Je sais qu'il y en a plusieurs personnes, plusieurs groupes qui travaillent pour le vaccin. Et en réalité, Probablement, ce sera un vaccin relativement simple de produire. Ça prend l'intérêt de le faire parce qu'il y a un marché pour un vaccin. Maintenant, avec l'éclosion, le flambé que nous avons en Amérique du Sud et centrale et tous les voyageurs. Alors, je pense qu'il y a de l'intérêt non seulement des chercheurs dans les universités, mais les grandes compagnies pharmaceutiques aussi. Une fois qu'ils sentent qu'il y a un marché, il y a de l'intérêt.
Dr. Hauptmann, Dr. Ward just told us, I'm going to translate very quickly, that people would not be able to maybe voluntarily take a drug on altruistic basis because what do they gain by taking a drug that might have some side effects in order to protect the whole population? What is your take on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. There's a risk with everything. I mean, there's a risk with flu vaccines. Pretty much any drug we take, there's a potential downside. I may be mistaken, but I thought I'd read somewhere we're going to need healthy volunteers to test, Zika virus vaccines. And I thought I'd read that somewhere yesterday, and I don't know where it is, but it might. I don't know if it was in Brazil. I'm sorry, I just can't remember. I would be leery about doing this personally.
Any vaccine program must start with healthy volunteers.
Yeah.
So, in fact, all of the phases, phase 1, 2, and 3.
Sure, you're doing the safety testing.
They're all done on healthy volunteers.
And then the challenge. But yeah, personally, I would be a bit leery. That being said, I think, based on the dengue virus technology, which is, as you know, a yellow fever virus backbone that has the dengue virus E and M proteins put into it. I think it's reasonably well tolerated. I don't think it's a terribly effective vaccine, but I think there's an unlicensed West Nile vaccine that was made the same way, but that was never brought to market because there's not enough of a demand for it. But I would well imagine that a Zika virus vaccine is being made the same way, both in DNA form as well as potentially live virus form.
Okay. Let's widen the scope and talk about sex and sports. You mentioned that, Dr. New, very, very briefly. Right now, the epidemic is centered in countries where talking about condom, talking about contraception, talking about these topics in very religious countries is right now very difficult for them. And since the only tool we have in the next months basically we can fumigate all of South America, but on a more practical basis, we have to talk about restraining sexuality a bit. How can we talk to these people and say to them that that is the right way to do it?
I don't know if we can tell them that.
No.
I think we could make them aware of the risks and the consequences, but it's a great question.
Yeah.
They don't know that they are affected.
Yeah.
Many times they don't know that they have.
No, but if numbers are starting to come out now, where the number of the week is 1% of the women infected might get a child which has microphilia. That type of information circulating in these countries, is that sufficient for them to change their behaviors, you think?
Yeah. But that seems very low. Compared to other teratogenic viruses, and I'm sure Brian can chime in here, but certainly with rubella virus, which was one of the classic vertically transmitted viruses. The rate of birth defects was much, much higher if contracted in the first trimester.
Yeah, I think the list of things we don't know around this question is stunning, because the husband won't know he's infected. Mm-hmm. He won't know if there's virus in his sperm. We don't know how long the virus will be in his sperm. We don't know when the period of risk is, It might even be well before the woman becomes pregnant, at least a couple of weeks. And it might be during the entire course of her pregnancy. What we do know now, we're starting to know, is that it looks like it's worse if you get it in the first trimester. And that just makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's very likely, this is a neurotropic virus. There was data that was just presented in abstract form this week, that if you take neuron progenitor cells, so these are the cells that make the brain, and you infect them with Zika virus, they do very badly. And so it's a neurotropic virus. It has the capacity to damage nerve progenitor cells, which suggests that it could have subtle effects in not just in utero, but possibly also in young children with rapidly developing brains. We just don't know. The second time when our brains actually dramatically change, all of us know this, is dealing with teenagers, right? Teenagers dramatically change their brain structure during the teen years. We have no idea if getting Zika when you're a teenager will make you even crazier than you already are or cause problems.
And then forget let them listening to anything. I mean, that goes out the window.
Yeah. Sorry, Mom, I had Zika. Yeah. That's why I stayed out all last night.
Yeah, that's going to be the excuse, the classic excuse, the Zika craze. Yes, Dr.
Yeah, just I touched on it, and certainly there's no answer, and it's difficult for me or anyone else to comment, not knowing or understanding the context or what's actually happening in the countries affected. But certainly, when you look at the area of sexual transmission, we've known that certain countries, I think it's Ecuador, has put a general sort of advice that women there should not get pregnant for 2 years. But when you say something like that, and then you also know the access to contraception and even abortions and so on is more restricted or has a certain sort of a framework around that in different countries, it does make it challenging. So it's really not for me or anyone else to comment on what happens or what could or should happen in other countries, but certainly I think the issues have been raised.
Okay, let's move to sports. Now, when Zika arrived, naturally the Olympics are coming this August. Panic struck the Olympic Committee. And their strategy is to go very intense on fumigating Rio in April, May, then stopping because it's going to be in the dry season in the Olympics. So in the dry season, the number of these bugs is much lower. But they're going to fumigate if they see a patch anywhere during the Olympics. They're going to come in and fumigate. Now, if you take a city like Rio, I don't know if anybody's been there, and the favelas, and this is a bug which adores urban regions that they can reproduce in this glass, you see. And do you think that the approach that has been taken there is a sound approach? Your own perspective as scientist or
J'ai hâte de voir les communications pour les gens de Rio de ne pas avoir les relations sexuelles pendant les Olympiques.
Les Olympiques, ouais.
Je doute qu'il y aura une bonne réception à ce message de santé publique.
Especially during the soccer.
Je le doute.
Yeah.
Oui.
Yes.
So I've been to Rio a few times, and the fact that it's in the dry season, c'est un avantage. The fact that they are probably intoxicating the entire state of Rio is, I think, they have to do that. But there will be transmission of Zika during the Olympics.
Okay. Oh, question. Can you rise up and take the microphone, please? Thank you. Your name, please?
Bonjour. Lise Gauthier de l'Agence de santé publique du Canada, région du Québec.
Parfait. En français.
En fait, c'est que là, c'est vrai que j'ai entendu aux nouvelles cette information-là, mais si c'était, par exemple, très circonscrit la problématique au niveau de Rio, on pourrait y voir un avantage. Mais là, ce qu'on comprend, c'est qu'on a plusieurs régions et pays. Alors, les gens vont converger vers Rio. Alors, je vois je vois pas tout à fait l'impact positif de ça présentement, là. Peut-être que les gens n'auront pas, n'attraperont peut-être pas le Zika à Rio, mais je pense que...
C'est le moustique qu'on tue, c'est pas les individus.
En
là,
fait,
vous comprenez, s'ils arrivent...
En plus, c'est des gens qui vont converger. C'est un grand rassemblement de gens qui vont venir des pays où existe déjà le Zika.
Oui.
En tout cas, c'était juste une réflexion.
OK. So, est-ce que vous pensez que c'est inutile, futile? Est-ce que le simple fait... Parce que je me souviens il y a quelques années, à chaque fois qu'il y avait à la Mecque cette grande confluence, on avait peur pour le coronavirus, on avait peur pour les virus, on essayait de détecter les gens à leur entrée à la Mecque. Est-ce qu'on devrait faire de même durant les Olympiques?
Ce que je veux dire maintenant, c'est que le CDC aux États-Unis a déjà, je pense, élaboré des lignes directrices et on conseille les femmes encore, c'est toujours les femmes qui sont enceintes ou peut-être qui planifient pour une grossesse de ne pas aller, pas voyager à Rio pendant les Jeux olympiques. Et je pense que c'est le même cas pour nous autres, je pense. On va donner des conseils pour les voyageurs de même façon.
Yeah, it's a good year or two to take your holidays if you're pregnant in Iceland.
Go north.
Norway.
Yeah.
Yes, beautiful.
New Zealand.
Yeah, Scandinavia. Scandinavia. If this gets worse, is Canada prepared? What is your plan if we get many cases, thousands of cases this summer or next year in Canada? What are we going to do? And we get microcephalia on top of that. Nothing.
Like I said, right now, the mosquitoes and the vectors are not established in Canada. So I'm assuming you're making the jump that there is a possibility, or there could be, or will be local transmission of cases in Canada. At this point, they're all imported. So any increase during the summer would be, at this point, they expect to be still in people traveling and coming back to Canada. And so our advice about personal protection, about using insect repellents, about I would say both men and women who plan to or are in the midst of planning and starting to have a family, that as Brian says, maybe you should not be traveling in areas that are affected by the Zika virus until more is known.
So I just want to, I'm just looking at the map for albopictus, and it looks like it covers the eastern half of the U.S. and it goes up into Michigan and the northeastern states. So it's possible they could get into southern Ontario and Quebec, just based on what I'm looking at on the map. This was based in 2007, I think.
And it's getting warmer and warmer, and our climate is changing quickly. Seriously?
Yeah,
we just changed zones.
Yeah, by far the more serious threat, if you're not pregnant, is chikungunya. Chikungunya has been circulating for a couple of years now, very actively, dans les mêmes régions. And we saw in 2014, we saw no cases of chikungunya in travelers. En 2015, 18, and they are sick. They are severely ill with bad joint pains, swelling that lasts for months.
Yeah, you can be off work for 6 months, I think, with chikungunya.
So, pour les gens qui ne sont pas enceintes, le vrai problème dans ces régions, c'est transmis par les mêmes moustiques, mais c'est chikungunya en ordre. Oui. Dengue, chikungunya, et ensuite, Zika. Et très bas, Zika. Sauf pour les gens qui sont enceintes ou qui veulent être enceintes, les partenaires, les femmes qui veulent commencer une famille.
Il y a aussi cet autre rang qu'on n'a pas abordé du tout, et on en a parlé en introduction. C'est oui, ça semble être un virus qui s'attaque au système nerveux, c'est le Guillain-Barré. Et là, quand on regarde les chiffres, on est un peu estomaqué. On voit qu'au Brésil, on en voit dans certains... Mais c'est pas clair que tous les États dans lesquels il est présent, ce virus-là, causent le Guillain-Barré. Alors, qu'est-ce qui arrive? Est-ce que c'est parce qu'on n'a pas encore calculé ça comme il faut? Les autorités sanitaires des pays n'ont pas les moyens ou on n'a pas de bonnes statistiques? Pourquoi ce flou autour du Guillain-Barré? Est-ce qu'il y a un de vous trois qui avait une piste?
Je peux essayer de répondre. Il y a plusieurs causes du Guillain-Barré. Alors, il y a toujours un niveau de Guillain-Barré dans les communautés qui varie d'une année à l'autre. Alors, pour le moment, on pense qu'il y a un signal que dans certaines régions, il y a plus de Guillain-Barré qu'anticipé, mais c'est une déviation d'une certaine base qui varie d'une année à l'autre. Alors, c'est fort probable qu'il y a des régions où, par hasard, maintenant, il y en a beaucoup moins causées par exemple, Campylobacter, et un bactérie qui cause la majorité des Guillain-Barré à ce moment. Alors, s'il y a une descente de fréquence dans une région de Guillain-Barré causée par cette bactérie, on peut manquer complètement une hausse de Guillain-Barré causée par Zika. Alors, ça prendra des investigations pour répondre à cette question d'une façon rigoureuse.
OK.
S'il n'y avait aucune autre cause de Guillain-Barré, ça pourrait être très, très facile.
Ouais. Mais les chercheurs, les épidémiologistes sont en train actuellement de faire des analyses pour trouver peut-être s'il y a un lien. Jusqu'à maintenant, il n'y a pas un lien cause-effet établi.
OK.
On suspecte.
Suspecte. Une perspective encore du journaliste ici qui, il y a 2 ans et l'an passé, a couvert Ebola. Je crois que la majorité des gens ici savent que je crois que l'Organisation mondiale de la santé est intervenue un peu trop tard, au moins 3-4 mois trop tard. L'argent n'a peut-être pas été dépensé comme il faut. On a de la difficulté à créer des cohortes parce qu'on est arrivé en retard. Même les vaccins, on a misère à avoir... Les équipes qui développent les vaccins, on a misère à avoir des cohortes intéressantes pour arriver à des conclusions sur l'efficacité de leur vaccin. Là, cette fois-ci, Dr. Ward, peut-être vous nous donner une perspective sur comment les autorités qui décident d'aller de l'avant là, avec Zika tentent de peut-être faire un meilleur travail cette fois-ci?
Oui. Serge peut parler de ça aussi, mais peut-être... Moi, je représente Canada et le IRSC sur une... C'est une tentative internationale pour trouver une meilleure façon de subventionner des investigations pour les éclosions importantes mondiales. Et Canada était parmi les premiers de lancer cette initiative. C'est Marc Houlette et IRSC. Il était un des premiers de coordonner avec les autres grands fondateurs du monde pour organiser une réponse internationale avec les bonnes priorités dictées par les besoins et pas par les frontières nationales. Pour Ebola, il y avait des problèmes. Probablement, vous avez écouté les nouvelles en disant que le vaccin canadien. Bon, aux États-Unis, on n'entendait pas le vaccin canadien. C'était le vaccin d'une toute petite compagnie qui a acheté les droits à ce vaccin. C'était la même chose pour Zimap. Non? Les anticorps ont été développés par Gary Cobencher et son équipe au laboratoire national à Winnipeg. Mais c'était seulement au Canada qu'on a entendu parler de anticorps canadiens. Aux États-Unis, ils étaient Zimap, d'une toute petite compagnie. Et c'était la même chose en Europe. Tout le monde avait leurs priorités, mais leurs priorités, ils sont arrêtés à leurs frontières.
Ça a nationalisé le débat. C'était un débat politique national.
C'est ça. Et en réalité, c'est en même temps ironique et franchement stupide d'organiser des recherches d'une telle façon. Alors, avec la frustration de Ebola, plusieurs des grands fondateurs ont décidé d'essayer de faire quelque chose de différent et de trouver un moyen de mettre leurs sous dans un pot en commune, d'organiser une priorisation des besoins scientifiques et de donner de l'argent aux meilleures équipes, indépendants de leur nationalité ou de leur origine. Et je pense qu'il y avait une réunion lundi-mardi à Washington. Je ne sais pas s'ils ont fait une avance. Probablement, c'est très facile de comprendre que c'est très difficile. D'organiser l'Union européenne, le NIH aux États-Unis, le RSC du Canada, les fondateurs d'Australie, de Corée, de Japon, de mettre leurs sous dans un pot en commune et de laisser les chercheurs du monde soumettre leurs applications pour ces sous. Ça, c'est très difficile.
Je crois que je veux dire seulement une petite chose avant de donner la parole à Serge, mais je pense, avec notre expérience, je pense la collectivité à l'expérience mondiale avec Ebola, il y avait beaucoup de défis, mais je pense aussi on a aussi beaucoup de leçons apprises. Et maintenant, je pense qu'on est dans une meilleure position pour réagir avec le virus Zika. Ce que je comprends, c'est il y a toutes sortes des enjeux. Même, c'est toujours une question comment les partager des échantillons pour les scientifiques à travers le monde pour trouver peut-être de développer un vaccin. Je pense que peut-être Serge a des autres choses à ajouter, mais au moins, je vois, il y a une volonté, un esprit de collaboration beaucoup mieux maintenant qu'avant.
M. Desnoyers, à vous la parole.
Moi, la parole,
oui,
que ça fonctionne.
Donc,
oui, juste pour préciser qu'effectivement, en 2016, on essaie de mieux coordonner à travers le monde la réponse recherche envers une éclosion de ce genre-là. C'est ce qui a manqué, effectivement, lors de l'éclosion Ebola. L'OMS est toujours connue comme étant une organisation qui va faire des interventions sur le terrain. Je ne crois pas que leur budget recherche soit énorme. Ils en ont, mais ils n'en ont pas tant que ça. D'où le besoin d'avoir une coordination internationale avec un nouveau regroupement qui existe depuis 2013, 2014. Le Canada fait partie de ce regroupement-là. Et les pays membres de ce regroupement élaborent justement des possibilités de financement qui permettent à leurs chercheurs nationaux de participer à la guerre, si on peut dire, à cette éclosion-là. Le problème, c'est de coordonner tout ça. Et on est présentement là-dedans. Il n'existe pas vraiment de pot commun. On aimerait ça. On aimerait ça d'avoir
c'est un rêve.
C'est un rêve. Une étoile inaccessible, comme dirait l'autre. Mais peut-être qu'éventuellement, il y en aura un. Mais maintenant, on est pris avec une coordination qui est un peu embêtante. Chaque pays a leurs propres moyens d'aller de l'avant avec ça. Et comment faire, par exemple, que les Canadiens vont pouvoir participer avec les Européens ou les Brésiliens, tout ça. On est là-dedans, mais on est là aussi, et je pense que c'est ça l'important.
Alors, ce qui manque, c'est une superstructure d'urgence comme ça, là, qui est capable de déployer l'argent comme il faut.
Oui, peut-être je peux ajouter quelque chose. Moi aussi, j'ai participé à une réunion organisée par l'OMS, et je pense créer un pot, c'est quelque chose de technique, c'est facile. La grande question, c'est, je prends en français, c'est gouvernance. Qui va contrôler le pot? Qui va prendre des décisions? Comment avoir une liste de priorités de recherche, tout ça. Ça, c'est toujours les défis. Est-ce que c'est une fusion ou un comité qui comprend les représentants du gouvernement, du secteur privé, les académiques? C'est quoi exactement? C'est toujours...
Toujours multifactoriel, plusieurs couches. C'est non seulement international, mais c'est qui prend le leadership, les universités, les pharma, les gouvernements. Comment on peut coordonner tout ça?
Exactement. J'aimerais rajouter, si je peux, une petite nuance à faire que je disais tantôt. L'OMS, qui est reconnu comme étant interventionniste, et c'est bon d'ailleurs, a maintenant, depuis le mois de mai 2015, un programme de recherche et développement qui s'appelle Blueprint. Alors, le Blueprint R&D, c'est tout nouveau et c'est comme si l'OMS a réalisé relativement récemment que oui, une réponse recherche est nécessaire lors d'une éclosion de ce genre-là, de toute autre éclosion de ce genre-là. Je voulais juste dire aussi que le regroupement dans lequel le Canada fait partie existe depuis un petit peu plus longtemps que ça, et on semble avoir l'impression de dupliquer nos efforts en ce moment. Éventuellement, peut-être qu'il y aura, je ne sais pas, un regroupement entre ces deux idées-là et une formation d'un pot commun. On verra.
D'accord. Bien, merci beaucoup de votre mise en perspective. Vous, le public qui êtes là, est-ce que ça vous fait peur, le Zika? Vous n'avez pas de commentaires, vous n'avez pas de perspective. Comment voyez-vous ça? Je ne peux pas croire que j'ai 20 personnes devant moi dans un café scientifique et qu'elles sont si blasées qu'elles n'ont pas une idée, une opinion ou une question à poser à ces gens-là qui ont une expertise commune. Vous êtes gênés? Allez-y, allez-y donc. Je trouve ça, de votre part, vous ratez une occasion, là. Allez-y.
C'est tellement même simple.
Oui, votre nom, c'est...
Lynn Bellemare, l'Agence de santé publique du Canada aussi. Je voudrais juste peut-être entendre parler sur l'immunité suite au Zika. Est-ce qu'on est au fait de l'immunité après la maladie, ceux qui ont fait la maladie? Est-ce que on est protégé? Est-ce qu'on peut être infecté par la suite?
The question is whether or not there's immunity after an infection with Zika. What do you think, Tom?
I mean, that's a good question. I would expect so, but I mean, if you look at what's happening with dengue virus, the immunity is not always good. It can enhance secondary infections and with different serotypes. But I think that's a great question because it has to do with whether, how fast this epidemic will run its course. Will the adults build up, natural immunity to a point where the circulation just doesn't occur very efficiently? So I mean, it's a great question. We don't know that yet.
We don't know.
I think we were talking about the fact that maybe immunity can play us tricks. If we've got immunity for dengue, will we react differently when Zika arrives? I mean, this is the same bug carrying multiple viruses. The first infection affects the second one coming, right?
Yeah, with dengue, but I mean, again, it's a bit more complicated because there's 4 different serotypes of dengue. So, as Brian, I'm sure, can tell you better than I can. If you become infected with, for example, serotype 2 of dengue, which is very common, there's a chance for antibody-dependent enhancement of the infection for the other serotypes, which could lead to some rather nasty complications, such as hemorrhagic fever or shock syndrome. Fortunately, that's still, I mean, I would say it's rare, but it's not the norm. So that's one of the unusual things about dengue virus. We don't know what happens with Zika virus when you become reinfected.
Dr. Ward?
Yeah, so it's again one of the things we just don't know. And we will find out a great deal more. But one of the things that we've talked about with the diagnostic tests is that there's extensive cross-reactivity between this whole family of viruses. And so the antibodies that are developed to yellow fever and to dengue and to Zika, they stick at least a little bit to all of the other flaviviruses. And so, for example, we don't know if you've had 1 or 2 or 3 different types of dengue. For example, does that mean you're more protected if you get Zika when you're pregnant? Because those antibodies might make it harder for the virus to get across the placenta to the baby. However, with dengue, there's also the possibility, if you've got antibodies against one of the types, that the antibodies will stick but not neutralize the second type, and that can not only make things worse, but it can help to get the virus into your macrophages, which are cells that like to move. And it's theoretically possible,
that antibodies that stick but don't neutralize could make you more likely to transmit the virus across the placenta. We just don't know. So it's on that very long list.
So, a lot of unknowns. On ne sait pas beaucoup de choses. C'est ça qu'on découvre, là. Oui, on est au tout début et c'est un peu symptomatique de l'ensemble de cet atelier, de ce café scientifique. C'est qu'on a beaucoup plus de questions que l'on a de réponses. Alors là, je crois qu'il est déjà 9 heures. C'est incroyable. On a fait 1h45. Si vous n'avez pas d'autres questions, est-ce que vous avez d'autres questions? Non? Bon, moi j'ai posé toutes mes questions, c'est déjà ça. J'aimerais remercier nos 3 panélistes. Je vais commencer par celui qui est très loin, il ne me voit pas, Dr. Tob Obman. Thank you very much for staying with us for close to 2 hours and giving us your feedback from far away. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Ryan Ward, thank you very much. And lastly, Howard New, thank you very much. I think I can conclude by saying that here we have a new threat, une nouvelle catastrophe, et on est habitué dans nos sociétés contemporaines à fonctionner dans des catastrophes de toutes sortes. Celle des épidémies nous touche grandement. On n'a qu'à se souvenir de l'épidémie de l'influenza en 1918. Et c'est celle-là que l'on redoute, celle qui, un jour, pourra balayer la Terre en quelques jours et éliminer des centaines de millions de personnes. Je ne crois pas que c'est le cas avec le Zika, mais il faut veiller au grain puisque la santé des enfants ici est à risque. Encore beaucoup de choses, beaucoup de sciences, il y a beaucoup de questions politiques, de structure d'intervention et de façon de distribuer l'argent et la connaissance. Il faut agir rapidement. On doit travailler contre la montre, puisque dans les prochains mois, ça va continuer. Alors, j'aimerais remercier les IRSC, Margaretha Pierre, merci beaucoup, Serge Noyer, David Wilkowski, qui n'est pas ici, mais ce sont les gens qui... Oui, voilà, bonjour. Alors, ce sont eux qui, dans les coulisses, ont organisé tout ça. Ça s'est très, très bien déroulé. Donc, un gros merci aux Instituts de recherche en santé du Canada et à l'Association canadienne de santé publique et à la Grande Bibliothèque. Merci beaucoup de nous accueillir. Et on continue à faire réfléchir et à se tenir informés sur le Zika. Merci beaucoup d'avoir été là. À la prochaine.